Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Steves, and it's my privilege to be the director of the DePaul Humanities Center. I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's installment of our ongoing series, Hungry Humanities, as we investigate the senses in which eating is understanding with our special guest, Robert Valgenti. If you didn't get a bento box when you came in this evening, please feel free to go out in the lounge right now and grab one. I think there are just a couple left, and our speaker will be instructing you on when to open them later. So, I'm going to shorten my usual extensive introduction to the topic tonight, both so that we can get to our main course a bit faster, and because Bob, as a fellow philosopher, will be serving up heaping portions of delicious philosophy to you on his own. So I'm just going to add a few preparatory words, a brief aperitif, to what has been our ongoing discussion this year concerning the relationship among rationality, eating, and the humanities. Let me, in fact, suggest that we reflect on the claim that if eating is understanding, then digesting is thinking. To be more specific, perhaps it's the case that we have utterly overrated the brain and might need to pay a good deal less attention to it. Now, I know this is a dangerous thing to say in the age of Donald Trump, frontrunner of America. It seems like the last thing anyone should be saying now is we should focus on the brain a little bit less. But let's discuss this just for a moment. For the last century, phenomenology has stressed the embodiment of consciousness and of thinking. It's the flesh that knows how to ride a bike, the hand that knows how to play the piano. As subjectivity has spread across the skin barrier, though, it has not typically been thought to burrow into the body, with organs and innards being taken to be conscious as well. Philosophy's turn to the body has been mostly about outer membranes, limbs, and sex organs. Merleau-Ponty doesn't devote a chapter of his Phenomenology of Perception to the gallbladder. The gut, especially, has been the subject of slander for a long time. In 1497, Alessandro Benedetti wrote, "The stomach is lowest and has a hidden place in the body because of its uncleanness, as though nature had spared the principal members and had relegated the stomach or bowels farther away from the sight of reason and of the mind, and fenced it off with the diaphragm in order not to disturb the rational part of the mind with its importunity." Truly, the 15th century and 21st century haven't diverged that much. We need to go back even further to find a moment when Western thought didn't see reason and digestion as antithetical. But there are worthwhile touchstones. Galen, the Greek physician and philosopher in the 2nd century AD, claimed that the stomach, especially, was a site of action, agency, and thought. He even claimed that the stomach's ability to presence the absence of food is paramount to logos, to rationality and reason itself, writing that nature has granted to the stomach alone, and particularly to the parts of it near its mouth, the ability to feel a lack. Speaking of mouths, we now know that saliva contains a painkiller, opioorphin. It's 6 times stronger than morphine. Opioorphin has antidepressant properties and can radically affect our moods. To chew is to be a bit happier in life. To dive down even deeper, though, we also know that people with certain digestive disorders suffer from nervous disorders of the gut. Their gut sends signals to the parts of the brain that process negative feelings. Indeed, the intestines regularly send multiple signals to many different areas of the brain, including ones that control self-consciousness, the insula, emotion, the limbic system, morality, the prefrontal cortex, fear, the amygdala, memory, the hippocampus, and motivation, the anterior cingulate cortex. In a concrete sense, it's not really that the gut sends signals to the brain, though, but that the brain and the gut are co-constituting the thinking process. What it means for us to be conscious is to digest. 80% of our immune system is in the gut, but it's also true that 95% of our serotonin is produced down there. Recently, a team of doctors has begun to develop antidepressants that affect only the gut, targeting the intestines as the site of depression. And this makes sense. Because the brain is the most protected organ in the body, the gut works in tandem with the brain to figure out how the body is doing. In fact, it's not only the site of thinking, but the gut is also our largest sensory organ. Unlike the brain, holed up inside a thick skull as if locked away in a cranial turret, a castle tower of bone, the gut is both inside and outside, always in touch with both the inside and the outside, and thus always deconstructing this false binary. The topology of the human body is that we are really a complicated tube with a central tunnel running from mouth to colon, in and out again. The food we take in both becomes our body, but also keeps our gut in physical contact with the world. Perhaps you already know that the trillions of bacteria that live in your intestines do not share your DNA. This is one reason that if we were to take at random a cell from your body, there's a 90% chance it wouldn't share your genetic code. You are only 10% you. But to put it this way is to miss the point, as if this is something to lament. You are a colony. You are a collective. You are legion. I should have more properly begun this evening by saying, welcome everyone, we are Peter Steves, and it's our privilege to be the directors of the Humanities Center. When the bacteria in our gut changes, we think differently, feel differently, reason differently. Indeed, we might not even be us anymore. Over the last 3 years, trials have been going on with gut bacteria replacement, and they've had some astonishing results. In 2013, a study found that after 4 weeks of taking a cocktail of special bacteria, some of the areas of the subject's brains were unmistakably altered, including the areas for processing emotion and pain and thought. And Dr. Stephen Collins, working with a study involving mice, has found that switching the diets and the probiotics that are within the mice's digestive tract amounted to switching the personalities of the mice. A nervous, cautious, overly analyzing mouse became impulsive and gregarious when the bacteria in her gut was switched with the bacteria in the gut of a mouse who was already impulsive and gregarious. And vice versa. Fearless mice become more cautious and calculating when their diet is changed appropriately, and their guts become homes to new ecosystems of bacteria. It's sort of a rodent Freaky Friday, and it all takes place in the intestines. It seems to be real. Collins has gone so far as to claim that it's a complete personality switch. To trade intestines is to trade our very subjectivity. So, let's conclude this evening's brief hors d'oeuvre thus. I have not come to praise the brain, but to bury it. And perhaps to bury it up your colon. At least, we must admit that what it means for us to think is to have a gut and to have food in our guts. Logos, if it entails anything at all, must involve eating and digesting. And just as rationality is a communal project, so is the project of preparing and taking in food. Thinking, understanding, eating, digesting, we're all in this together. And I am pleased that your legion could join our legion here this evening. And now, the main course. The collective that is Robert Valgenti has many talents. It's our pleasure to host him and welcome him tonight. I could almost say welcome him home, because Bob is an alum of DePaul's doctorate program in philosophy, having completed his dissertation with my colleague Will McNeil nearly a decade ago. In the years since he's left DePaul, Bob has gone on to accomplish a great deal. His work in hermeneutics is internationally known and respected, and he's made a name for himself in the field of contemporary Italian philosophy, especially as a translator of and commentator on Italian philosopher Gianni Vattimo, including the hot off the Columbia University Press's Vattimo tome of Reality coming out this month. Bob offers classes and publishes in continental philosophy, ethics, political theory, and aesthetics, and he has a really fantastic piece on the philosophy of comedy in a special issue of Angelicae next year. Bob's also an amazing teacher. Before embarking on his PhD work here at DePaul, Bob received a Master's of Arts in Teaching and taught high school students for a while. Today, it's the undergrads at Lebanon Valley College in Annville, Pennsylvania that are the lucky ones. As Associate Professor of Philosophy at Lebanon Valley, Bob is a popular professor who has, for the last 9 years, inspired his students by introducing them both to scholarly, rigorous work in philosophy, as well as concrete, life-changing practices that have bettered the conditions for the entire community on his campus. Indeed, if anything, Bob has managed to show how these two pursuits are yet another false binary. 3 years ago, he founded and continues to run the group EAT at Lebanon Valley College. EAT stands for Engage, Analyze, Transform. As an interdisciplinary undergraduate research program, the project has two explicit goals: to improve the dining experience for students and to dissolve the boundaries between the dining and academic spaces on campus. That is, to bring together eating and understanding. Specifically, EAT uses data-driven research to promote and assess the goals of ethical reasoning, intercultural competence, healthful living, and environmental sustainability. And what a difference it's already made. Concrete changes have been implemented on his campus due to the work he and his group have completed, with waste down, sustainability up, and health and deliciousness at the forefront. Within his profession, Bob is a major leader in food studies and the philosophy of food in general these days, but he's putting his theory into local practice every day on campus, a model for us all. I'm so pleased and honored to have him back this evening at DePaul, and to the city of Chicago, which, by the way, is home to his favorite gourmet Italian restaurant, the Olive Garden. You should hear about this place. Friends, please join me in welcoming our very special guest, Professor Robert Valgenti.
Is this working? Okay. All right. Thank you, Peter, for that great introduction. And before I start, I just want to thank Peter Steves and Anna Von Clissold and everyone here at the Humanities Center for putting this event together. I've asked them to go beyond the normal call of duty, and they have responded to all of my requests, as silly or bizarre as they might be. So we'll see how that all goes this evening. Also, for students in the audience, if you ever wonder, do you ever get over that sort of nervous feeling in front of your former professors? Nah, doesn't happen. So I'm glad that some of my former professors from the PhD program are here as well this evening, and hopefully I will, to some degree, do them proud, but also perhaps annoy them a little bit, and they can give me the evaluation at dinner after this is all over. So. Peter has already said a lot about the work that I'm doing at Lebanon Valley College. So to set up what I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to try and thread a very narrow gap, as it were, between my philosophical work and some of my work that I'm doing on campus with students and with food. So I'm going to get started, and I'll give you the quick rundown here. So a little menu or a little guide to our evening. The first, I'll begin with an origin story. Secondly, I'll go to a philosophical idea. This might be the most philosophically intense part of the evening, so hopefully we're warmed up by then, so no one pulls an intellectual hand here or anything like that. I'll talk a little bit about the search for authenticity. My focus tonight, beyond eating as understanding, is going to be specifically on this phenomenon of authenticity and why I think it is such an object of fascination for many who think about food and care about food. And then those little boxes that you were handed when you came in this evening, that will be, let me see if I can take care of that. That will be our authentic meal for the evening. So a little bit of cruelty. I've asked you not to open that until that portion of this evening's program. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing on campus with Transformative Eating. And then we'll have some time to share at the end. And please, as you know, a lot of what I'll be talking about tonight will be very cursory. I'll move through some things rather quickly. So if you have questions, please do ask those at the end of my presentation. So let me talk a little bit about our
Can you turn your mic down just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Oh, I didn't know it was there. Talk a little bit there.
Okay, a little bit better there? Yeah, I think that's
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So how did I get here? This is a poster produced by the Food and Drug Administration in the 1960s. This hung on the wall of my grandmother's kitchen. And in the idle moments stretched between adult conversations, my brother and I would turn our attention to the picture and begin our weekly game. Corntail, melon butt, milkback, egg toe. We would gaze upon this picture and almost as if to insult each other, would reduce the other person merely to a repository for the things that they ate. And there was something prescient about this picture, to ask, are we nothing more than collections of the things that we eat? And it's in this same place that I have my earliest food memory. There I am looking 70s fabulous. There's my grandfather. It involves lasagna, and we'll be journeying to beautiful Newark, New Jersey. So what happened? It was a normal Sunday dinner. Lasagna was one of the many things that were served on that day. I was there eating my lasagna. I took a portion, probably far too large. I took a bite off of the fork. And the interesting thing about mozzarella cheese is that it has a kind of stretchy property to it. And I found myself at this moment, after taking a bite, with a piece of lasagna somewhere down there, probably in my stomach or close to it, some lasagna left on my fork, and then a continual string of cheese that went down my throat and into my belly. And of course, yeah, as a 4-year-old, this was fascinating. And I sat there, like this, musing, as a young philosopher might do. And the moment that the adults noticed that this was happening, all pandemonium broke loose. Because clearly I was choking. He wasn't talking. There I was. And so my grandfather rushes over, grabs the fork. He's like a comic movie. He's pulling on the cheese, and it's connected to the piece that's in my stomach, and the cheese just keeps stretching and stretching. My mother's yelling, my grandmother's yelling. Things are going crazy. But what do I remember most about that moment? A certain calm, a certain awareness, and a naive fascination. A moment of reflection that changes everything. Cheese stretched somewhere between being and non-being. What was me and what was not me. What was on the way to being me. As Peter just said, my belly in contact with the outside world. There was, in one sense, a chilling recognition that I was like the food tiger, a container for things. And of course, the fear that we are not just what we eat, but merely what we have eaten. But such moments of suspension are fleeting at best, artificial abstractions of our lived experience. I realized after that I could not simply be an eating mechanism comprised of edible things. My eating and my musing upon it connected me to family, to culture, to social bonds and care. But it also pushed me away from myself. In a way, I identified with the cheese. It was but an object stretched between two states, the not yet me and the me, outside and inside, my inside, just an extension of the outside. And there was for the first time a certain obscurity about my understanding of self, a moment when I became foreign to myself, when I saw the other becoming me, still in the act of becoming, now stretched before me for my observation and scrutiny, a physical manifestation of the metabolic process through which we move beyond ourselves. I was eating cheese, but I would become something more than just cheese. There's a deeper lesson here, one I could never have realized while sitting at that table. In many ways, who I am now was shaped by the experiences I had there, shaped by my encounters with food. But in what way exactly? What does it mean to be a crossing point of nature and culture, of biology and society? My talk today will attempt to sort this out, or at the very least provide a starting point for a reflection on the ways that eating for human beings represents an increase in our being, a transformation into something other that is nonetheless always what we are. My simple thesis then is that eating for us as humans is understanding, a process through which we grow, transform, and if attuned properly, through which we develop a more critical, open, and empathetic outlook on the world. In a deep sense, taking hold of our existence as eaters is a way to begin philosophy, a way to consider what it means to be an eating being, to be in a process of becoming while remaining open, that is, unknowing to what we might truly be. And there's a certain way that this arrival here is not entirely purposeful. It was actually here on this campus that I first taught a course on food and philosophy as part of the first year seminar program here. The first time that I thought, and not in any purposeful way, could I connect my ideas, my philosophical ideas, to one of the practices that I love, which is cooking and eating. And what I saw in food systems as well as problematic, that we tend far too often to be eaters who are a little bit, if not entirely, mindless. And mindful eating is not simply arising above our animal natures, as if mindless eating were the foundation, a biological self upon which our cultural eating is mapped and developed. Human eating is always mindful, and that we find ourselves now, in this time, in this body, eating mindlessly should spark our curiosity, if not our concern, to ask what has gone wrong. So, I hope to open a path to philosophical thinking, a mode of thinking all too often dismissed as abstract and out of touch with corporeal reality, by engaging the very conditions of possibility for our understanding in our world, conditions that constitute the familiar and habitual encounters we have with food and eating. This approach neither concedes our species being to brute materialism, nor simply posits some absolute ideal of philosophical or gastronomical existence, but instead risks the unlikely thesis that human being and understanding is never divorced from human eating. And elsewhere I've talked about this a little bit, what I call the gastronomical event. The way that we exist in this world is something that has always been framed by our eating. To be human is to be that gastronomical being. So let's extend this philosophical idea. Humans are, first and foremost, and like all other living creatures, food. Our existence is premised upon relations that exist among living entities oriented towards their own perpetuation. Entities locked in a struggle for survival. Before we are tool makers, thinkers, communicators, or visionaries, we are food for apex predators and maggots alike. We are matter to be consumed, nourishment for the vast array of life teeming in a world that greets our arrival. We are not alone in this primal existence, but rather connected and equated with the beings caught in the same tangle of relations. All food is by its very nature ephemeral. Food, human or not, presupposes the act of eating in its manifold aspects: consumption, ingestion, alimentation, destruction, and appropriation, such that eating is its condition. Bananas, rabbits, aphids, and tubers are properly food only on the condition of the existence of monkeys, bobcats, mantises, and hogs, only on the possibility of their consumption and appropriation by some eating being that seeks out its continued existence. Eating entails the termination of another life form's being, the termination of its possibilities for being something other than food in the most general sense. Human existence does not escape this cruel dialectic. Humans eat, humans exist, not in the self-standing fullness of being, but rather as a detour around some other being's eating, a deviation from the being that we truly are, our being as food. To be is merely to delay being eaten. Eating is thus intimately tied to our continued possibilities. Not only does eating highlight our interconnectedness with a context of prior meaning, but it does so under the shadow of death. The only way that we can maintain ourselves as individual beings is to engage in an act that, despite appearances, is shared and transformative of any notion of a stable subject. In order to preserve who I am, I must eat and thus destroy, in a certain way, who I am. To be human is, of course, also something more than just to undergo a mere physical transformation. This surfeit of being, the transformation of the conscious framework in which our identity is situated, is what I refer to in this paper as understanding. More than just simply what we are, understanding consists in our possibilities for being, the horizon into which we have been placed, and what lies beyond the horizon as the possibilities of what we can become. Our understanding is thus always, to a degree, self-understanding, even though this identity is always something obscure to us, always beyond our complete grasp. Self-understanding in this sense points away from any notion of a stable self towards a self that is embodied by its possibilities, its otherwise being. So we could say briefly that understanding is not a mental state in which we understand something or a state of affairs. Understanding is our experiential frame of reference. It is a certain orientation within the world. Understanding is a kind of being able, as Heidegger would say, a taking up of certain possibilities of our being. So this is where it gets real heavy, philosophical. So let me put this in other terms. And we'll see this a little bit when we go through our eating exercise later, that we all bring something to our encounters with food. So imagine a person who loves meat. I'm sorry, Peter. Imagine someone who sees the world through a certain framework, through a certain lens. They might even graph it out. Perhaps they see the world like this, that there's a direct correlation between the cuteness of an animal and its deliciousness. Perhaps you've encountered this. Oh, that lamb is so tasty and so cute. The horse, I mean, if you have to, but you know. But once again, everyone has their preferences. How are you going to rate the cuteness? And of course, taste is something that we've been told again and again that we can't dispute. Your taste is your taste. So even though we can find some analytic way to express this, nonetheless, it is an analytic way of expressing something that is rather quite intimate to us, which speaks to our individual worldview. How do we shake ourselves out of this? For many of you, this might be entirely problematic, or you might shift some animals around. You might think, did it even include that animal that's really cute and delicious? How is it that we have experiences that might move our understanding into a different place, that might open up possibilities, particularly when our eating is so determined by our habits, by the framework of the culture in which we find ourselves, and the older we get, the less that we want to change. Maybe we encounter some things that shake it up. The kitten is really cute, but I'm not thinking it's terribly delicious. It seems to break the analysis here. And the lobster's so tasty, but clearly not cute, as far as I'm concerned. You might disagree. Our abilities and our habitual ways of eating do little to call attention to themselves. My experience with the lasagna, or perhaps the encounters we have all had with challenging and unfamiliar foods, serve to bring into relief the contours of our understanding, that conceptual lens through which we view the world. In fact, much of my work is wagered upon the notion that our encounters with food not only draw attention to our understanding, but are among the primary shapers of our understanding. That we find that eating is not only rooted in a past, my own personal history, my history that's tied to the society and the culture that I've inherited, but that eating is also futural. It is oriented towards my possibilities for being, and those possibilities can change. The circle that unfolds here in the process of understanding what in philosophy we would call a hermeneutic circle, need not simply be a perpetual process of overturning, appropriation, and reincorporation. At its heart, the circle is one that interprets the very act of bringing forth its own conditions of possibility. In this way, it is also a critical circle, but in the most positive sense, that it is a separation and a lifting out, as Heidegger would say, of the special, the uncommon, and at the same time, the decisive. Understanding functions as a means of orientation and placement rather than delimitation and rejection. The taking up and consideration of positive possibilities rather than a rejection of negative outcomes. Therefore, the search for authenticity does not take us back to some absolute beginning point as if it were some quest promising a final treasure of truth, but rather to the variable conditions that shape our meaningful experiences with eating in the here and now. Understanding something new always entails a questioning and overturning of the self. Our knowledge is not merely accumulated. Our brains are not merely repositories for objects of knowledge. It is ingested, transformed, incorporated. It is ultimately metabolized. So what I'm proposing here is not what we might call applied philosophy. My goal is not to put concepts to use as tools at my disposal. Rather, I hope to create experiences where concepts come to light and are constructed. If there is anything authentic about what I'm doing in a loosely philosophical sense, it is this: to encourage and create experiences with food that compel us to reflect upon the very conditions of those experiences in a critical and a constructive way. This is what I've called, and what I teach, as a kind of gastro-philosophy, which strives to initiate this process and metabolize our notions of self as eaters and as thinkers. We can all take a breath there. That was the heavy lifting part. Watch and learn, huh? Get that rocking? My poor grandfather. You saw earlier, he is offended. So let's talk a little bit about authenticity. As I stated earlier, I want to consider the notion of authenticity in food as one possible way to consider the role that eating plays in the shaping and the critical access to our understanding. There are lots of other ways, there are lots of other topics. I always feel a little bit guilty when I present on a topic like this, because it avoids so many of the really essential issues of food security, of hunger, of sustainability that we should talk about. But oftentimes, you need to find that entry point that students can associate with, and then make the big moves. So one of the exercises I'll do sometimes is I'll play this game with my students. Is this salsa authentic? We've got a recipe, tomatoes and cilantro and jalapenos and onion and salt. Ooh, a little lime, that's nice. Moreover, I'm going to use tomatoes from my garden. There they are in all their glory. There's my garden. There's tomatoes, live action shot. Got some peppers. Those jalapenos have been on the plant a little bit long. They've started to turn red. There's some green ones there. How do we enter into a discussion of something that is, for some, familiar, for some, a little bit outside of their normal range of experience? How do we want to think about authenticity? A term that can pull us in many directions. In one sense, the authenticity of food could refer to a process of validation within the commercial food industry. Money and safety are at stake when we consider whether the fish or the cheese or the honey or anything else is really what it purports to be. Such products are given seals and designations to mark their authenticity as the real deal. And processes of verification include everything from the monitoring of supply chains to the chemical analysis of the foodstuffs. The DNA analysis to make sure your bass is actually bass. This is the first realm of authenticity, what we can call the authenticity of the object. This kind of authenticity stretches beyond the commercial viability and validity of certain foodstuffs. Even within more everyday desires for authenticity, focus is quite often placed upon the object itself, as if its authentic qualities are intrinsic and moreover identifiable by those who would consume it. These are essential claims about the object. In our everyday use of the word, the idea of authentic food carries with it certain connotations. It is genuine, honest, natural, unadulterated, tied to a certain heritage or tradition, prepared in the proper way, based on a historically important recipe, the real deal, and so on. And it's for this reason that I imagine original oatmeal sounds much more appealing than plain oatmeal. And it is why authentic can be added to a label in the manner of an ingredient, a little something extra to make it truly what it is. That's also artisan blends. Extra. But beyond the flagrant overuse of the idea of authenticity, we can still locate some central features of authentic foods that are worthy of deeper consideration. And this, I'll borrow some of the qualifications from my friend Andrea Borghini, who's at the College of the Holy Cross up in Worcester, Mass., fellow philosopher of food. And when he talks about authentic foods, a topic he writes about quite often, he says that authentic food should have a collective origin and a tradition, that they should reflect the interpretive effort of the cook or the companions or those who are involved in the making and the eating and the enjoyment of the food. That oftentimes it's going to reflect a creative inspiration or innovation. Something that's authentic is, at least in its origin, something new. And there's a judgment by a collective that's appropriate to the food. Usually it's going to be part of that regional or ethnic or cultural group that sees that food as part of who they are. Those who promote authentic foods or even authentic experiences note the ways in which the consideration of authenticity in such experiences can empower local people and traditions, undermine the homogenization of the modern food system, liberate our palates, and challenge our notions of self. So if you're a member of a group like Slow Food Chicago or some other food activist group, or you're someone who takes part in culinary tourism because you want to learn and experience other cultures, oftentimes we can find that the desire for authenticity is one of the ways that we make sure that things do not disappear, that things remain, that individuals and groups of individuals can find voice and expression and sovereignty through their culinary expressions. But critics of authenticity oftentimes cite its impossibility as a concept, point out how it leads to a fetishizing and commodification of certain groups and resources, and in general stifles creativity because the criterion for excellence becomes locked in an idea of the past or a traditional way of doing things, or even in a singular technique. The desire to identify and promote the authentic food often leads to the appropriation and essentialization of certain knowledges, often at the expense of the living culture from which it was taken. But let's be clear. A culinary exchange does not necessarily entail a cultural exchange in the fullest and most beneficial sense. But nonetheless, this is something we might attempt. We know that the subjects of supposedly authentic cuisines never really consider the issue of their food as authentic. To them, it's just food. Only when an origin is under dispute does the authenticity become an issue, only when the normal conditions of possibility are disturbed. Authenticity presupposes that one is on the outside to a certain degree, alienated from the matter at hand, with one's possibilities for being placed into question. So we can think of two sites of authenticity. What I just talked about, which is a kind of realist notion, the food object itself as the site of authenticity, what we might call a sort of objective experience. There are individuals who talk about such things. And then we can think of the other side, perhaps call it a constructivist notion of authenticity, where the eating subject is the site of authenticity, and we can focus on the subjective experience of the eater or the eaters. And what interests me in this is the space in between. As a culture of eaters, why are we so obsessed with the experience of authenticity? Why is it important to us? Is this desire a healthy one? Should we consider the search for authenticity in food part of the good life? Well, the idea of authenticity has a rather established history within philosophical literature, existentialism and so on, but I don't want that to be the touchstone. I would rather our starting point be our experience with food in the way that that desire for authentic food reflects broader trends within consumer culture. The best and perhaps most frightening articulation of this spirit can be found in the book authored by James Gilmore and Joseph Pine nearly 10 years ago. Authenticity, What Consumers Really Want is the title of the book. The book is a fascinating study of recent consumer trends. In a nutshell, they argue over the past 100 years, Western economy has moved from an economy of commodities to one of goods, and then to one of services, and then finally, in the recent past 20 years or so, an experience economy, one defined by the desire for authentic experiences. Think of Starbucks. Think of Disney World. Think how many of you were sold on a college education. We are willing to place more value in meaning and in dollars upon an immersive experience that gives us more than just the good or the service. Now, what the authors of this book suggest is philosophically rich, but not in the way I suspect they intended it. They point to what is an authenticity paradox. And frame it as such. All human enterprise is ontologically fake. That is, in its very being, it is inauthentic. And yet, output from that enterprise can be phenomenologically real. That is, perceived as authentic by the individuals who buy it. What matters, they ultimately contend, is our individual inner experience of the phenomenon and how it is rendered. That the phenomenon is authentic to us. That works in Marketing 101, but I'm not sure if it works in Philosophy 101. The very premise of their argument still relies on the ability to distinguish the real from the fake, the authentic from the inauthentic, as if some magical third position from which we could distinguish the one from the other were easily accessible to us. They rely not merely on the authenticity of the rendered phenomenon, but implicitly and uncritically accept the authenticity of our inner experience, as if it were beyond question. But this is precisely what is under question, the obscurity of our own self-understanding. And this has been perhaps my modest goal all along, simply to draw the certainty of our understanding into question in order to expand the horizon of our possibilities. So one of the ways that I put this into some practice, last year I was lucky enough to be able to take 15 of my students to Italy for a 3-week study abroad experience in Perugia, but we also extended that trip to Venice, to Modena, and to Parma, out into the Umbrian countryside. And the idea was this: could I, in 3 weeks, teach a philosophy course? Could I get them to think deeply about their experiences there, focusing on place and time and identity, through their encounters with food? Could I use the food that we would find there as a catalyst for their philosophical thinking? And this was a real challenge. Despite my desire to dissuade them of the idea of authenticity, to show them how the idea of the authentic might not be all it's cracked up to be, it was difficult to even begin the conversation without getting them excited, through my own excitement, about the authentic things that we would find there. So we took a trip to Parma. We went to the factory you could see there where they make Reggiano Parmigiano cheese, and we went to a place where they make real prosciutto di Parma. And let's face it, How am I going to express to them that this is not the same packaged ham that they're going to find at Jewel, or in our case at Giant, that's the store in central Pennsylvania, without in some way referring to the language of authenticity? So perhaps it's not that authenticity is the problem. Maybe authenticity should be the primary focus. Maybe we should be talking about why we are so interested in this notion, as my students were, and as I think anyone who might travel to Italy for the first time, as they were all first-time travelers to Italy, were excited to do. So what kind of crazy ideas did I come up with? Anyone could steal this idea, because it was completely unintentional, but it worked great. So we went to Venice, and we had a culinary tour. We did some tastings. We had, local wine. We had the cicchetti, which is a little kind of hors d'oeuvres that they serve in Venice to go with your prosecco, all kinds of fun stuff. And I thought, well, we've got a full day in the city, and the city is kind of like a maze. How can I get them to bring concepts and gustatory experiences together? So I sent them on a scavenger hunt, a conceptual scavenger hunt. And I incentivized it. I said, basically, the best team, whoever wins the scavenger hunt, is going to have an incredible dinner prepared by me for them when we get back to Perugia. And I was going to pull out all the stops. They had already done some cooking classes with them, things like that, but this was going to be completely over the top. And what I asked them to do was to take the concepts, the philosophical concepts we learned in the first week of class, to find experiences that in some way embodied those concepts, to capture a notion of that somehow with a picture, and then to write about it. I wanted them to really process this information. This is actually one of my students' slides when we talk about the cognitive nature of taste. This was at a restaurant called Paradiso Perduto. That is the goby, which is a local fish in Venice that they, when you get a fritto misto with all these different types of mixed fish. And this was a challenge for many of my students. It was the first time for many of them that they actually ate a fish in its real form. Not in a stick, not in a fillet. So what did I want them to get out of all of this? What we find at that moment when we're confronted by the food experience that we desire, or that we fear, or that challenges us in some way, is that even the idea of the other, the foreign or the authentic or the real, is itself already a part of our understanding. The encounter with a new, possibly authentic food is not merely an encounter with the food stuff. It is a reckoning with our own conceptions of otherness and authenticity. We are here, beyond the merely subjective realm of experience, so crucial to the economics of authenticity and its end goal of mere consumption. Another way of framing this shift would be to recognize how eating, matters of taste, matters of cultural value, need not be reduced to relativism, where truth is nothing more than what we perceive or what we wish it to be. So my friend up at Gustavus Adolphus College, Lisa Helke, also philosopher of food, there are very few of us, we have only ourselves for friends, puts it this way: to adopt a relativistic view would be to suggest that the dish itself, its creator, its cultural context, makes no contribution to the work of cuisine. Authenticity is a quality of the exchange between the producer and eater. And eating on this model is a kind of conversation, a transaction. To eat is to place oneself in the uncertainty of judgment and exchange with others. As omnivores, we are not only confronted with open possibilities for consumption, but with open possibilities for understanding. If there is an authentic experience, it is the one that suspends our criteria for evaluation and renders the very desire for authenticity open for reconsideration and conversation. I should check out this. Oh, there it is. There's some audio-visual technician who is really worried right now. I'll let that cool a little bit more before I dive in. Well, we're just about there. Let's talk about an authentic meal. My microwaved ramen. Clearly, it's authentic. It even has some writing on it that I don't understand, which also adds to the authenticity. No one could have just put that there on a whim. It has to mean something. I'm not sure if what's under authentic is authentic. That's a long list. But there's a way in which this is absolutely not authentic ramen. I know people who would be offended, others who would be disturbed, ask what's happened to me. But in another way, it's a completely authentic experience. Quintessentially real for people every day. Students. What is it to live like a student? It could be ramen, it could be mac and cheese, it could be lots of things. If you want to know what it's like to live that authentic student life, get through your day on a cup of coffee and a bowl of instant ramen. This might be an exaggeration, but I imagine that this very rudimentary demonstration at least compelled you to find a point of orientation in taste, in lifestyle, in value. Did it invoke nostalgia? Disgust? Food is a crossing point, a manifestation and repository for our value judgments. Eating, or in this case, just thinking about eating, makes those values present and places them into contact with our embodied senses. I think for this exercise today, it's important that we eat. Important for us to taste a wonderfully cognitive experience that we all too often reduce to its physiological limitations, when in fact it might be the key to our social interactions. My tastes, your tastes, those inimitable tastes, so tied to pleasure and sometimes to discomfort, can be accessed only after entry into the body, after the process of incorporation and appropriation is already underway. And yet, that completely singular and unique and intimate experience links me to all of my fellow tasters. Can we even think that democracy could be founded on the idea not of equal rights, but on the idea that taste cannot be disputed? That because we all know what we like and have our own tastes, we have a seat at the table. This is at least what I've suggested with my students. In many cases, for students who have never experienced a wide range of foods or who have never experienced philosophy, their tastes are an accessible entry point. Students know what they like, and we can begin to talk about how those likes are shaped and formed by their own experiences and by the world that's around them. The sense of taste is not hardwired for authenticity, but it does seem at its core to be a kind of critical apparatus, one that can undermine the tendency for authenticity to become an essential trait of the foods we eat. Taste places authenticity back into the realm of the possible, into the realm of conversation, where the challenge is to overcome the inimitability of individual taste and to find a common ground. So, before we dive, just a warning for those who might suffer from allergies, that there are products in your pack that will have sesame seed oil, specifically tahini. There are soy products. There are tree nuts and peanuts that were around the dessert confection that you have there. And then there's also dairy that is in the dessert item that is there. And so, yeah, let's open up our boxes. Let's see what we got. I apologize. One of the things I didn't place onto my slides, if someone doesn't have a box, is a picture of all the things that are in there. No one's yelled out, oh yeah, yeah. So how did this all come together? What was I thinking? I wanted to compose a meal. I wanted to compose a meal that would fit in a tiny box. I wanted to compose a meal that we would be allowed to present here. Are we allowed to present this here? I wanted it to be food safe, so you don't have to worry. Everything is prepackaged, so I didn't like stick it in my luggage and carry it all the way from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, or something like that. Leave it outside. But I also wanted to be a moment where, because this is the challenge, you've been waiting all that time, and I explicitly told you not to open it, and it had a sticker on it. And now that you're opening, you're kind of interested in what's in there. So you have to preempt your desire to eat with that desire to look and to think. And I oftentimes think about it in this way. If we want to consider the notion of authenticity and what's there, we might think about some vectors of authenticity. And so this is what we have here around the insignia in the middle. The questions of how and what and who and where, that these might be ways that we can articulate the ways that authenticity manifests itself. So let's go through the items that are in the box. And I tried to put them together so you can, we had hummus, we have some hummus there, but you need something to eat the hummus with, so that's why the baby carrots are there. But let's take a look at the baby carrots. So much fun. So perfect for little tiny hands. And so when I was thinking about the foods to put in here, and thinking about what I should say about them, I wanted to start with baby carrots because for some, they're not an authentic food at all. Or if we think about them as an authentic food, we have to think about them in terms of authenticity meaning natural, or unadulterated, or pure and original in some way. A basic ingredient. I just heard some crunch, that was nice. It's part of the appeal. But baby carrots are anything but this. Of everything I researched on this topic, here's the best thing I found, and it was on BuzzFeed, because that's where I get all of my knowledge. This is what someone said about baby carrots. That this was the shock when they learned, wait, they're not growing these delicious little carrots as tiny carrots, because you could then put them on that graph with the cute and delicious things. But like all of our agricultural practices, there's a lot of human intervention that's involved. Baby carrots are a special version of carrots that are grown closely together. They're very cylindrical, and they keep them close together so that they stay cylindrical. Then when they pick them, they're essentially cut in half or cut into thirds, and they're put in a tumbler, and that's what makes the edges nice and round. And despite what lots of conspiracy theorists will tell you, there's nothing strange or abnormal about the process that they use to make the baby carrots. At least nothing beyond what you would find in other agricultural products. But we've got this starting point. And it's not just that we can think about the how, but we can also think about the what and who brings this to market. Most of our baby carrots come from the same place in California. Most of our carrots, as a matter of fact. And if you're in the right place at the right time, this could even count as a local food. Now the hummus becomes more interesting. And the Truett brand hummus I liked, number one, because it was shelf stable, so we don't have to refrigerate it. That's a nice feature, especially when you're serving a lot of people you don't know and you don't want them to sue you. So, but it's a food, it's made in California, that is completely ripped out of its cultural context in the way that it's presented to us here. It is all about the natural ingredients. You've got chickpeas, you've got tahini, you've got a little bit of lemon, some salt. It's a nice natural product. But if you've done any reading about hummus, the big thing over the past 10 years have been what they've called the Hummus Wars, the battle for who really owns the recipe to hummus. Is this a Lebanese dish? Does it have its origins in what is today Israel? Who can claim cultural ownership over this food? And yet it's a war that's not a violent war, and we see the powerful potential of what a discourse about food origins and cultural identity can be. Make hummus, not walls. Food can bring us together. Thinking about what makes an authentic food and having that interchange in conversation can actually transform our relations. But there's also something about authenticity that's a little bit dark and dangerous. What happens when we get too tied to a notion of the essence of something? What happens when we identify, as has happened historically again and again, a certain culture, a certain race, a certain ethnicity, a certain political group with a certain food in a negative way? What happens when food becomes proxy for a kind of ethnic essentialism? This is something that cropped up in Italy in 2008. Lega Nord is the Northern League. They're a separatist party in Italy that is has a centerpiece of its platform, among other things, xenophobia. And polenta is the traditional northern Italian food. It's basically grits or gruel. It's cornmeal and water. And their political posters, because they were worried about how many Northern African and Eastern European immigrants were in their country, was this: yes to polenta and no to couscous. Because to be Northern Italian means that you're polenta, I guess. And that we can associate the food like couscous, particularly with the Northern African immigrants. And at the bottom there it says, you know, take pride in your own traditions. You know, those Italian traditions that go way back, like corn from the New World. No one's perfect. But this is the interesting thing I think about this reflection, is the degree to which we can balance both the positive and the negative sides of authenticity. Now, in honor of my friend and former professor H. Peter Steeves, you'll find in there not meat jerky, but vegan jerky. And this tells us something about our range of experiences as well. What's at the center of our plate? If you come at it from a certain cultural and commercial perspective, it is fake meat. It is something that has been made to look like what we normally associate with meat. And this tells us something about how we view protein in our diet, as this picture displays. The centerpiece, the primary feature there is animal flesh. And we've got some other sources of protein that are happily around the outside. But what happens in a cultural framework where that is flipped? Or in an economic framework where that's flipped? Vegan jerky isn't fake meat or faux meat. It's just seasoned tofu. What it is and how authentic it is transforms depending on the context in which we find it. And I'm a terrible host. How's everyone find it? Is it interesting and enjoying? I see some nods. Now, I lied before. I did actually bring something on the plane from Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Well, you've got in the little gold box, and finish your meal before you go for the dessert. If there's any food in that box that is truly authentic in the way that many people like to use the term authentic, well, then it doesn't get much more authentic than what's there. What's in that tiny little box is what is known as opera fudge. Has anyone had opera fudge before? Because I would see the sadness on your face because you had clearly at that point been to Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And they're like, what's my life come to? Opera fudge is made in one place. It's made in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. The recipe and its origins are somewhat mysterious, but they know it goes back for a couple of hundred years. One of the primary purveyors of this is Wertz Candies. You might have seen them if you actually go back to the first season of Dirty Jobs. Mike Rowe is actually at Wertz Candies, coating the opera fudge and all sorts of other things. But it's dirty, but it's chocolate. It's a good dirty. And this is a truly local food. So if you want to think about where a food comes from, who makes it, how it's put together, its authenticity is about as unique and as individual to that place as you might find. But we've got nothing in our sensory apparatus that helps us to distinguish this. Authenticity for us must always begin and must always be shaped by ideas that are given to us. Someone who's from that area might recognize the taste of it, but only because they've been indoctrinated into that taste, into that experience, through the culture that esteems its value. For someone like most of you who's never had it before, our point of access is going to be comparison to something else. And perhaps the information provided to you by someone who purports to know something about what's there. I don't know, how do you find it? It's a little bit sweet for my taste, but
Delicious.
it's good. Quality product. I'll tell the Wirtz brothers when I get back that you enjoyed it. So let me pull things together here. Sit, we eat, we think. So I want to talk a little bit about transformative eating, and Peter already said a few things about this. But 3 years ago, I formed a group, trying to think about how I could do undergraduate research on these topics with my students. So there was a grant at my college, a small internal grant that I applied for, and I was able to form this group. Eat, engage, analyze, and transform. And Peter already went through the basic mission of the group, but I try to get students to come up with research projects that begin with a philosophical idea and then end with real change in the dining hall. And I've been lucky, and I can't thank them enough, that Met's Culinary Management, the culinary service that runs our dining hall, for some strange reason allows me to ask for anything, and they usually provide it. They have been the utmost in hospitality when it comes to allowing my students into the place. And you can see that we've done all sorts of activities where students are making and serving food there, that my class is making pizzas in our pizza oven at our campus dining hall. I have 2 students who formed a working sensory taste lab with some help with some professors from Drexel University. And what they wanted to do is make change in the dining hall by offering healthier and tastier options of current foods being served there. And the way that they've done it is they've said, okay, let's target a certain food. Let's make a healthier version of it or a more sustainable version of it. Let's put them side by side and let's get students down into the taste lab to vote and see which ones they like better. And in many cases, we've worked through several iterations of a recipe to find the one that students are going to like. This is not only good for METS to do its research and to provide something that students like, but the buy-in that we get from students, the amount of complaints that we get from students about the dining hall, which is one of the favorite undergraduate pastimes, have just gone down and down and down. Here's some of the results you can kind of see. We just did one the other day. Lasagna is a big favorite, coincidentally. And so we put 2 lasagnas up for the taste test. 2 vegetarian lasagnas, one where the cheese was, or the ricotta was replaced with tofu, and the other one with cottage cheese. Most of the students who were there thought there was one traditional and one new, not that there were 2 new that were there. But the results, as you can see, the larger graph towards the right means that it was good for students. Authenticity is oftentimes tied to tradition. We have one of the most ridiculous traditions on my campus, where I work. For God knows how many years, Thursday has been Chicken Tender Thursday. If you dare tell students that you're going to get rid of Chicken Tender Thursday, students will riot. So we took a more subtle approach. We said, let's just make a smarter chicken tender. At the time, we were sourcing those chicken tenders. Now, Met's dining service, 85% of the food they make in the cafeteria is made from fresh ingredients, from scratch, in-house. But chicken tenders was one of the big items, and it was one of the few that was sourced elsewhere. So we broke the contract with Tyson, and then our chef, John Hopewell, and his colleague, the head chef of all of Metz, the corporate chef, started working on some versions of chicken tenders, sourced within 60 miles, hand-cut, never frozen, breaded. It takes them 2 days more work to bread the 300 pounds of chicken tenders that they need for any given Thursday. So they were willing to invest the extra time and the extra effort. And what came out of all of this was not just a change there, but as you can see, Chef John Ollie won Chef of the Year. This is actually the Chronicle of Higher Education doing a story on how we can use food to teach students about better ethics, better sustainability in the food that we eat. We haven't gotten rid of the frying part yet, so the nutritional side of this still needs a little bit of work. I've worked with science professors where we've done things like have a cricket food lab, where we've looked at alternative protein sources and made food with cricket meal and with actual crickets. Some students love it. Some students have their arms crossed and are like, please do not make me eat them. Other things we've done, we've got a study abroad at the table where we've introduced students to new foods from around the world. Usually students coming back from study abroad experience help to put those menus together. We've had an emphasis on whole grains. A student who worked on a project called Economies of Scale, where she actually went through all of the fish sourcing practices for our dining hall and tried to change all the sourcing to more ethical sourcing, once again at greater cost, but the dining service has been willing to do that without raising their prices. A touch of class where we actually talk to professors and get foods highlighted during mealtime that come out of the Spanish class, that come out of the world history class. I have a student right now who's working on a dining hall orientation program that will be part of our new student orientation, where they'll meet the campus nutritionist, get a tour of the dining services, and actually preempt the bad habits that they normally pick up from upper level students. And then other students who are working on a sustainable campus agriculture project. All of this has had a nice effect on my campus. The other side of this is that I've been asked to join what's called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. And I'll just move through this quickly because I think we're at that time where we need to wrap up. But essentially, I was asked to be a part of this because what they're trying to do on the large scale is what I've been doing at Lebanon Valley College. What they want to do essentially is this. Find a way to change our nation's food system for the better, with its central feature being the protein flip, trying to find alternatives to meat and place alternative protein sources at the center of the plate, to get people to eat more vegetables, to source things locally, and do all sorts of stuff like that. And what we're doing currently right now, first and foremost, is coming up with 3 research projects, one focused on waste, one focused on the protein flip, and one focused on coming up with a metric for sustainable foods. And then we're replicating those at 25 major research universities across the country in their dining halls, so that we can aggregate all of that data and then try to affect change where change really happens. The habits that students form in their first couple of years away from home, particularly in a college dining hall where they might have a buffet that they can choose anything from, are the habits that generally stay with them for the rest of their lives. So let me end with this thought. It's a famous line from the philosopher Heraclitus. It started with a little Nietzsche, so it's good to go back to Heraclitus. And something to do with the kitchen and the gods being there too. And this is an obscure and strange quote, but perhaps it means something like this, that the kitchen is not a place just for a reduction to the material, but a place of transcendence, of sharing, of listening, of coming together, of moving beyond ourselves. We might ask, and you might have questions to pursue this, is this an authentic meal that we've had tonight that you might have some other night? You might ask, is this an authentic philosophical experience? Probably discussed this at dinner. But perhaps we can leave with a couple of thoughts. Feeding is understanding. We should perhaps think that taste is a cognitive experience, that we never eat alone, but always with others. that the conversation and the transaction moves both ways, and that more than destruction, eating is a process of creation, or dare we say, confection, a bringing together and mixing of things to produce something new. And I urge you all, and hopefully this could be part of our conversation tonight. I'm meeting with some students tomorrow, and if you have questions, please do ask about the ways that I've been working to integrate what I do in the classroom with what goes on in the dining hall. Make the table an occasion rather than an obstacle to thinking. Share your food, share your thoughts. You are almost always never eating alone, even if no one is there with you. Food brings others to our table, even if only by proxy. Strive for something beyond sustenance and survival, for yourself, and most importantly for others. And challenge yourself as an eater and a thinker through encounters with new foods and new invitees to your table. Thank you.
What I'd like to do is to take 10, 12 minutes, something like that, and to give you a chance to ask some questions for Bob. I'm going to start us off then, Bob, if you don't mind.
Just to see you there,
yeah. Yeah. Just listening to the presentation, I wonder if you could just comment briefly on whether authenticity is both a bourgeois worry related to class, and if it isn't in some sense related to a kind of neoliberal problem, in that is it something that arises for people when, before colonialism, before imperialism, that is, when you're just sitting around the place where you've always been, nobody says, is this really authentic food we're having tonight? It's
right.
Only when there's some outside force that comes in and maybe appropriates. Is authenticity tied to bourgeois values and colonialism in any way?
I would say that, short answer, yes, very likely. And it seems that one of the key characteristics of the quest for authenticity is that it's always pointing away from itself. It's always pointing towards an other. It's oftentimes an other that is in some way turned into the exotic, or it's a resource to be exploited. It is, very simply, the product of a consumer culture. Why are we interested in authenticity? If not, I think that's why I went to that one book about the economics of authenticity, is that it's something that we can seize upon. It's something that we can control. It's something that we can consume as an idea, and that gives us a certain modicum of power. So in that way, absolutely. It seems odd. It would seem odd for anyone who is living in the smallest city. This is the debate that the town of Kolanata had with the slow food movement, where they make a version of lardo, which is basically cured pig fat in the style of prosciutto, but it's just all fat. It's delicious. But they had never thought of their product as something that was a commodity in that way. They're a place where they mine marble, and it's an energy-rich food that got them through their days. Everyone made it in their basement. They would actually keep them in marble caskets, essentially, and that's where they would age this stuff. And when slow food came into the town and wanted to make it into this ideal of cultural heritage, the town ultimately revolted, because they then had to conform to the standards of marketing according to the EU health regulations and all kinds of things. But the town, even though it was Italians working with Italians, felt colonized. They felt like they had been taken over, and that had become a destination to be consumed. They felt their lifestyle had been consumed. So I think this is oftentimes the case. So where we see that question of authenticity arise is oftentimes maybe a place where we first need to listen. One of the things I didn't include in the presentation, because it would have taken too much time, is my favorite scene from a food movie, which is the final scene in the movie Big Night, where after the huge party, the main protagonists silently sit in the kitchen, exhausted from the evening before, and Stanley Tucci's character, sits there and just quietly makes an omelet and divides it among his brother and, the waiter, and they sit there and they silently eat. And there's something beautiful about that moment where we return to the pure enjoyment of things. And I think we miss out on what that might be oftentimes because we desire the idea of the food rather than the food itself. So yeah, we're actually working on, with my students now, we're doing a year-long course on Walter Mignolo, so this issue has come up in various ways there. I think someone's over there. Yeah, hi.
Hi. I have celiac disease, so when I came here tonight, I assumed I wasn't going to be able to eat. So to you, I say thank you.
Oh, great.
Because everything so far that I've touched in that box is safe for me. The comment I have about that is, this has been a very interesting talk because I've learned over the years, being on a special diet that I have no choice in the matter about, over time, what's really bothersome to me is less about the convenience of my food and more about how I really feel other when I'm in a room full of people that do not have celiac disease, you know? There's an experience that I can't have. And so a lot of what you were saying tonight makes so much sense to me. My husband and I actually tried to experiment, and we had a vegan, gluten-free Thanksgiving, actually 2 years in a row. And what a difference, I know. What a difference in my own sense of joy with my food when I can look around the room and I'm having the same shared experience with my friends, as opposed to sitting sort of off to the side and going, well, this is safe for me and this is not. And I've realized over the years how food is so much more than just, okay, I've got my 3 meals today and that's that. It's a huge part of life in a way that I didn't realize until I had to change and adapt. And my last question is the fudge gluten-free? Because there's no label on it.
Yeah, and as far as I know it is, because the ingredients are, and I can pull up the recipe, I think it's cream, sugar, the cocoa, cocoa product, chocolate products. As far, I know it's made in a facility with nuts. I know they told me that was it, but yeah, they didn't mention anything about. I mean, I know nothing in there has gluten.
I want that fudge.
Okay.
I know it's not vegan, but I want that fudge. But again, thank you. I really appreciate
you're welcome.
Box, so.
No, thanks for your thoughts, and I think what's important about what you said is that what oftentimes the experience with teaching my students or teaching anyone, or just talking about food is getting them to think the other side of that. It's only once the normal approach to food breaks down because of various conditions that those things come into relief. So for my students who don't have any problems eating what they just desire to eat, trying to get them to understand how that norm is constructed, how that norm is shaped by our food system, by their culture, by their habits, by what's available to them, and then to get them to think outside of those norms is in many ways the biggest challenge. And so we try to make those strides, but it's been, we've had that issue, as many campuses have had, both with students who have certain allergies or can't eat certain foods, but also students who, as we internationalize our campus and we try to make them more open to diversity, being able to find your food and find your comfort food is a big part of what it means to have a relatively stress-free life. You can never get rid of it all, but yeah, that's certainly part of it.
I'm a registered dietitian and also a culinary school graduate, and I was wondering if in your partnership with the colleges looking at sustainability, whether or not Tulane University was part of the collaboration in their collaboration with teaching medical students how to apply culinary techniques as future doctors.
Yeah. I know that Tulane is not part of, at least not currently, not a part of the menus of change. The first step was to invite, I think there are 14 universities that are in, and then there are academics from the remaining 9 universities or so that are representing different factions. And one of the key features that we started with was to ask to not just go after large research schools, but also schools where the food service was in-house. Because that would help to avoid any kinds of sourcing issues and issues with conflicts of interest and things like that. But what we see, what we're doing is something that we're seeing all around the country, I think in many cases, is that those collaborations are cropping up and that people are understanding not simply food as medicine, but just how essential our gut health is and how essential our general well-being is, and how that can be shaped by food, and how we've in many ways, not just for medical professionals or health professionals, but for the average person, have lost a kind of literacy with food knowledge, and how trying to rebuild that might be one of the essential things that we consider as part of an education or part of what it means to be a thoughtful person and an educated person. That it's not something that's there on the side. So to get my philosophy students and my general education students into the dining hall, talking to the chef about taste, and talking to the chef about sourcing or about their concerns, with what they eat, with where it comes from all those kinds of things. Those are important because it disabuses them of the habit of thinking that their intellectual lives are just there in the classroom and are there for one purpose only.
Well, let me say this. We are continuing our series this year, whether you're part of the DePaul community here or joining us from the outside tonight. Really glad you could be here. And if you'd like to know more about our upcoming events, we're going to have an event just talking about vegan meat and meat substitutes, about refrigeration, what refrigeration technology has done to change the way that we eat. So please make sure you sign up on with our email address newsletter outside, and we'll get that information to you. Even though all this is still to come, it's hard to imagine we'll find anybody who could so eloquently put together theory and practice and show us that they're really the same in the end as Professor Valgenti did tonight. So please join me in thanking him one more time.